Hey everybody, Youngman Brown here. Today's episode is very important for anyone creative, which is you, and for anyone who struggles with any kind of blocks, which is also you probably. And my guest Philip Ruddy and I go pretty deep into what might be holding you back and how you can kind of get through it. So that being said, the conversation was a longer one, so it's about an hour-long episode, so we split it into two. So today you're getting part 1 and tomorrow is part 2. But I just wanted to give you a heads up so that you are not surprised whenever I chime in at the end of the episode and say that you can catch the rest tomorrow. That being said, I will shut up and get right into the episode. So I hope you enjoy this, the first part of my conversation with Philip Ruddy. Let's do it! Your Creative Push, episode 67.
To reinvent ourselves to become who we are destined to be takes an incredible amount of strength.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Philip Ruddy. Philip is a Los Angeles-based depth psychotherapist who previously spent 15 years as a writer, producer, and development executive in Hollywood. He now works with writers, artists, and performers, helping them explore and transcend creative blocks, anxiety, depression, and the unique stressors of the film and television industry. And you can find him at his website, activelyimagine.com. Philip, man, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Youngman. I'm delighted to be with you.
Of course. I was wondering if you could maybe tell me what I missed in that intro and maybe go a little bit deeper and kind of tell me how you kind of found yourself along this path.
Sure. Well, in addition to being a therapist, I'm married to an artist and a landscape architect, and we have a wonderful son who's 4.5 years old, and he definitely keeps us on our toes. I primarily focus these days on my therapeutic work with writers, performers, artists, but I do also produce documentaries. I have an ongoing 20-year documentary that I've been involved with since 2001 called Married in America. And that's a study of 9 American couples. As I mentioned, we first began filming them when they got married in the year 2001. And the first 2 installments are available on Netflix and iTunes. And it's a long, ongoing project that's directed by Michael Apted, who's pretty well known for his longitudinal documentaries.
Oh, cool.
But for the purposes of this interview, I'd love to talk a little bit more about my therapeutic work.
Can you kind of get into that? What made you kind of decide to start doing that?
Yeah, well, I really empathize and identify with writers and artists. I grew up outside the Chicago area in a household that was filled with books and art and conversations about films. I grew up loving to read. Ray Bradbury was kind of my favorite as a kid. I loved short stories in particular. And I moved out to California for college, and I was an English major and just wrote a lot of short stories. And I thought that's really what I want to do with my life. I graduated, realized I had to make some kind of decision that would also provide me with a living.
Right.
So like a lot of people, I decided to postpone that for a bit. And I bought a one-way ticket to Bangkok, Thailand, and spent a year backpacking all over Southeast Asia. And I didn't have a lot of money, but as you know, you can backpack pretty inexpensively. And I was really just filling myself up with adventure and creative experiences, things that I would, that I hoped would fuel my future as a writer, as a creative person. I studied Buddhism and meditation for a time in Thailand. I taught English in Taiwan. I had just all sorts of amazing experiences. But after about a year of that, I came to Los Angeles thinking that if there was a place to make a living through creative work, that might be it. And I was fortunate enough to get a position in development, originally as a screenwriter, as a script reader, and a story analyst for a feature director named Michael Apted. And that was just amazing. I mean, just to be able to work with screenwriters, to be able to help shape and craft story with them. I couldn't believe that this was a job that people got paid for. And that's how I started my journey, creatively. I thought at the time that I would eventually become a screenwriter myself. This was the early 90s, and there was a spec script frenzy at the time guys like Shane Black and Joe Esterhaus were literally making millions of dollars overnight. They'd write a 3 to 5 page treatment, fax it to their agents, and by the end of the weekend, they had gotten an incredible paycheck. And a lot of writers were really filled with this feeling of, wow, we can really make a living here in Los Angeles, and unique creative work, spec work is something that's really wanted and needed in the business. So it was a great time to be here. In terms of how I eventually got into the therapeutic work, maybe I could talk about that a little later in the show when you talk about, some of the worst things that happen to you creatively. I know that's one of the questions you typically ask.
Sure. Well, then can you tell me what exactly is depth psychology for somebody who doesn't know about it? What does it do, and what's the meaning of it?
Yeah, depth psychology is a form of psychology that's influenced by a lot of sources, but principally, I would say Freud and the works of Carl Jung, especially. The idea is that we combine talk therapy with an exploration of our clients' unconscious material. And that can be manifested via their dreams. If they're an artist, it could be their paintings, the images that they create or are perhaps obsessed with. We look at things like symbols and Greek mythology. We also look a lot at one's personal mythos. What's the personal myth that you are leading your life by? What's the story you tell others when you meet them at a cocktail party or a job interview? What's the story you tell your parents? What's the story you tell yourself? And by talking this over with a therapist, the idea is to bring more of this from the unconscious up to the conscious and eventually be able to have a more balanced integration. A lot of us, we have wounds just going through life. We all have some hard knocks and bruises. And it's really what we choose to do with those that can affect our future and our present actions. So that's what we do in the room. It's obviously all confidential and it's an intimate place. I find that I have a good fit primarily with people that come from a creative background. Again, I'm able to kind of tap into my experience as a development executive and a screenwriter and a short story writer. That kind of is my background that I can bring to this world so I can understand what they're going through. I work with screenwriters. I work with a lot of comedy writers, a lot of stand-up comics as well, some performers, actors. So my background really informs the work that I do therapeutically today.
Now, do you find that like a creative type has a like kind of a different story, like a different MO than a normal person? I don't want to say normal person, but do you find that like the same kind of themes go through all creative types?
Yeah, I would say that the creative types, so to speak, that I work with are essentially just normal people that are highly tapped into their creative side, and they've decided to move to Los Angeles and try to make a living off of that. That's really the main thing that sets them apart. A lot of the work I do is helping them identify and manage anxiety and depression. And often they'll start out by coming to me saying, I've got writer's block. And I'll say, well, what does that mean for you? How does that show up for you? Because it can be different for every person that walks in my door. But they'll describe to me what's going on, whether they freeze up in story meetings or just can't hit deadlines, whether they can write, for hours and hours if it's their own original spec material, but as soon as they get an assignment, they suddenly feel frozen with anxiety or fear. However that may be, we work with that specific example, and I can help them with techniques to try to transcend some of that anxiety, some of that depression, see what that might be rooted in, see what the story is they're telling themselves about it, and come up with some possible solutions. A common request is that they'll want a quick fix, like, okay, I've got this writer's block, but I'm on a show and I need to get rid of it. So just kill it, exterminate it, distract it.
Give me the magic pill.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'm out of here, right? I just got to get back to work. That kind of idea. And with depth therapy, we take a longer approach. Like, we really want to see what's the root of this. If you're a creative person, it's most likely not just going to come up right now. It's something that you're probably going to wrestle with for many years to come if you don't really make a decision to focus on it now and to come up with some ways to help you navigate it. One of the phrases that I like to use is, let's befriend it and then we can transcend it.
I like that.
Thank you. The idea is not just to exterminate this writer's block, but to engage it in dialogue. And I actually mean that quite literally. Carl Jung explored something that he calls active imagination, which is the process of engaging in an imaginal dialogue with another part of yourself. So, in working with a writer who's got writer's block, I will ask him to describe it. What does this writer's block look like? What does he or she appear in the room to you as? Is it a monster? Is it your mother-in-law? Is it your boss or the showrunner if you're on a show? Is it the director that you're working for? It can take many different forms. Often it's this kind of monstrous creature that they'll say, it just wants to kill me. It just wants to kill me. I don't know. I'm trying to get rid of it. And, I'll encourage them to literally sit down, open up their laptop, and just as they would write out dialogue in a script, write out a dialogue with this writer's block, see what it has to say. And often they're amazed at the answers they get. Writer's block is often an unexpressed part of ourselves that wants to be heard. So if you actually give it some time, give it some careful reflection, and engage it with respect, with patience, it'll often tell you what it wants of you, and you can then begin to negotiate. You can talk about it. For people that don't work in an imaginal space, that aren't writers or artists, I know this can sound kind of out there, but for people that are creatives, I find that it's actually pretty intuitive. A lot of creative people, that's where their ideas come from. It's kind of from the ether. You're going to sit down and write a short story. You just kind of think of two characters that might be in a room, and then you start them talking to each other. And as most writers know, you can control it to a certain bit, but after a while, these characters often take on a life of themselves if the work is going well, and they'll just go off and have their own adventures. And as a writer, you're racing to keep up. So it's tapping into the same part of our imagination, the same part of our mind or our psyche to engage in this dialogue with the blocks that are troubling us.
Yeah, I like a lot of the things that you're talking about there. And it's interesting, until right now I didn't think of writer's block as, like kind of this like personal thing. I always thought it's like this bug that you catch. Oh, I got writer's block. Oh, that happened to me too.
Yeah.
For each person, it's like a very personal thing, and it really, I guess, like you're saying, it really goes a lot deeper than just not being able to think of ideas. So I can really appreciate that. Yeah. And as you were talking about, having a dialogue, I thought about back to the times where I had writer's block. And almost every time, I guess it's not a monster that I would talk to.
Yeah.
It would just be like, I would imagine scorn or people laughing, or so. I guess for me, it's more of like, what will people really think about what I'm doing?
Yes.
That's definitely one of the holdups for me. So
yeah, that internal critic, right?
Oh yeah. That internal critic that you assume is going to be, once you create it, is going to be like an outside critic, but they don't really always exist. It's always that kind of imaginary critic that you assume is going to be there that almost never is.
That's right. We're often far worse critics than the real flesh and blood critics that we'll encounter. That happens so often in with the creatives that I work with. We think the worst, and the fact is, there is such a hunger for story out there, a hunger for art, that people in general are either they're grateful for it or they're just not interested and they'll move on. But it's usually not this negative, horrible, critical reception that we're imagining in our head that's stopping us from creating the work.
Absolutely. Unless you've been on YouTube.
That's right.
And read comments on YouTube. That's the one place where just
the worst of the
everybody
worst.
says exactly what they want to say. Oh gosh.
That's true. But there's something to be said for just putting your art out there. If you are the type of person that can actually get by just fine with not creating your art, then that's great. But most people that are drawn to the creative fields, whether they're doing it for a living or just for self-expression, they're not able to just hide that or put it away without experiencing a lot of pain, and that can come out as anxiety, as depression. They'll just say, "Well, I guess I'm not a writer." I mean, I've marveled so many times. I'm a fan of your podcast. I've listened to quite a few of the episodes, and
Thanks,
I'm just so moved by the number of stories by creatives that talk about how they were wounded in elementary school by a teacher, or in high school by an art teacher, and especially because it's coming from teachers, it's so shocking to me.
Yeah.
These are the one people we would hope would be trained with some compassion, some empathy, some sympathy. But as you hear firsthand, week in and week out, that's often not the case. And these traumatic wounds that we experience as sensitive, creative people, often they stop people from creating for decades, for years of their life.
Yeah, it's that one voice, and especially, every time an artist or a writer tells me about that, it's just like a kick. It
Yes.
really makes me mad. It's so uncalled for, especially at a young age, from somebody who you're supposed to be looking up to, who's supposed to be kind of guiding you and helping you get better, not telling you that you suck. Like, I don't. Why do you think that those professors and teachers do that?
Well, one thought of mine is that if you're familiar with the term shadow artist, Julia Cameron, in her great book, The Artist's Way, has this term, the shadow artist. And that's a person that has sublimated their own desire to create and instead, kind of works around artists or works for artists. I see that a lot in the entertainment industry. People that wanted to be writers or actors, and instead they become studio executives, or they become casting directors, or some other facet of the business. Sometimes they have some early wounds, some bitterness that their dream didn't work out for them, and they're going to take that out on the people that still are coming here, fresh off the plane or the bus or the train in Los Angeles, wide-eyed, thinking like, I was the best actor in my high school class, or I was the best writer in my, college group. And there's this kind of prevailing attitude that sometimes shows up like, oh yeah, I'm going to show you. Every single person in this town wants to be a actor or a writer, and you're one of many millions. And if I didn't do it, buddy, you're not going to do it either. I mean, sometimes that can come out unconsciously or consciously. And even outside of Los Angeles, some of these art teachers that your clients talk about on your podcast that say these cruel things, they may have had someone say that to them. It's very similar to abuse. I mean, if you look at the story of trauma in families, physical abuse, emotional abuse, often it is carried down from generation to generation. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that this kind of creative trauma, so to speak, can be passed on along, unless someone really seeks out help through things like your podcast, like surrounding themselves with a tribe of peers, which I really recommend for any creative. You've got to save yourself. You really do, because you can't necessarily count upon the teachers that just happen to be in your school district when you're a kid, or happen to be your professors when you're in college, or if you don't choose to go to college, just the people that are around you. You've really got to seek out your tribe. You've got to find other like-minded artists, surround yourself with them. You've got to seek out mentors. You've got to do your therapy if you can find a way to do that, to really look at your life objectively and have somebody that's trained and specializes in helping you transcend some of these issues as well. Whatever you can do, you've got to seek out those resources, because it's tough and it takes a lot of courage to be a creative person in this world, and it always has.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think and I was going to mention that too with the YouTube thing, where it's just these people that they're jealous maybe, or it's all their own issues that they want to just kind of put on somebody else. And YouTube, I think, is funny because it's one of the only social media platforms, I think, where they have the option to click a thumbs down.
Yes.
And I think just having that is just like, let me go troll YouTube and put thumbs downs and tell people what I think. And what you said about surrounding yourself by a tribe, I love that idea, because I think that's the whole purpose of this podcast. Because especially if you're kind of like a closet creative, or if you have these desires to be creative, it's hard to find that encouragement, especially if you aren't actively being an artist or actively doing it because you're afraid to say, hey, I want to be an artist. Hey, I want to be a writer. I want to do this. It's much easier to say, hey, I'm writing this book. So it's hard to get over that hump. And I always mention this quote from my man, John Lee Dumas, who says it on his show, Entrepreneur on Fire, is you're the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So it's like you're the average of those people. So it is really important to surround yourself with those kinds of people. But if you don't have those friends, those family members that are creative, that are actively pursuing that, that's why things like podcasts and going on internet forums and finding people on the internet that you can talk to is really, really important.
Absolutely. I think for a creative person that wants to take that, that path, and they want to do it seriously, the first creative act is really reinventing yourself, creating your new self as an artist. And we think of the idea of persona. You look at somebody, for me, I grew up as a kid that loved punk rock, and Iggy Pop was one of my idols growing up as a kid. And, he comes up with his own name and his own persona and creates a style that no one else had seen before. You look at David Bowie, a guy that created, dozens of personas, literally from, head to toe, his name, his fashion, the style of music that he put out. And like many, I was so moved and saddened when he passed away so unexpectedly. But I was reading an interview from years ago, and he talked about how he created the first persona being David Bowie, since his birth name was David Jones, because he didn't know what to write about as himself, as David Jones. He thought it would be too embarrassing to go up on stage and sing songs as himself. So he came up with the name David Bowie, and that was his first creative act, really, is reestablishing himself. I think of your podcast, and I remember from, I think, one of your first episode maybe, or later, you talked about how you created a persona to do your podcast. Am I right?
Yep. Yeah. My real name's Michael Young. It's
yeah.
I'm not embarrassed of it. It's just a Youngman Brown kind of caught, and
yes. Well, I think that's incredibly important for creative people, because you do have to transcend so much baggage. Just, who you are the first 17, 18 years of your life is really who your family thinks you are, who your childhood friends think you are. It takes a lot of courage to kind of transcend that initial orbit, and become something different. Carl Jung talks a lot about the pressure that children feel to carry on the unlived lives of their parents. That is such a heavy, heavy power that parents, even with good intentions, can lay upon us. That to reinvent ourselves, to become who we are destined to be, takes an incredible amount of strength. And that's why, again, I talk about this idea of gather your tribe around you. It's not necessarily the people the family that you were born into, the friends that are around you. You need to identify that, seek them out. Your tribe is out there waiting for you to join them, but it takes a lot of effort and energy. You got to take that first step and go find them, and you will be embraced.
Absolutely. And looking back, the reason I made this persona was so that I wouldn't get fired. Because I cursed and I don't know what I thought, that I thought all of my employers were just reading my blog, which they weren't. And I know that they're not listening to this podcast either, but if they do, so be it. But it makes it easier to kind of, like I was saying, to face your demons, or face like the scorn, like I was talking about, of being embarrassed of what you're saying. Well, you can kind of place that in this new persona, this Youngman Brown that I've created or whatever. And it's interesting when you can do that. It makes it so much easier to let go of the ego and to be yourself. And then that persona, you kind of realize, is actually you. That's actually who you are. And you can kind of then step into that and kind of really embrace that role and kind of shed your skin, of Michael Young, of who he is, and they kind of merge and become one, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, yeah. That's how we transcend, and often you go through, you'll continue to do your art, you'll put it out there in the world, and that authentic self, it becomes more and more real. So you become the person that you want to be, and there's advantages to having that persona, and the challenge is integrating that with the person perhaps that you were born as and the person that you were born to be. And that's something we do in depth therapy. We talk about that, and we look at how to find this integration, this balance. Because either one, if it's unbalanced, can have negative effects. You think about Alice Cooper, Vincent Furnier, right? He created this persona of Alice Cooper and became this huge rock star in the 70s and 80s. But he fell into addiction. He over-identified with that Alice persona. And after near-death experience through drugs and alcohol, he was able to get sober, and he realized that, okay, I need to separate these personas now. I can't live out my life as Alice Cooper. When I'm on stage, that's who I am. And when I'm off stage, I'm somebody else. And that's a way that he found to integrate that. And creative people, particularly living in Los Angeles, where the stakes can be so high, people are paid a lot of money if they're successful. And there's a lot of pressure to just be this image that we're marketing, be this perfect celebrity that never gains an ounce and always looks fabulous and young and can look just right for the paparazzi photos. People can really get lost in that image, and they can lose their authentic selves. And when I work with clients, the key is to try to help remind them of this authentic self and find a way to integrate it so that, yes, they can have a successful career, but they can still be themselves and hold on to that authenticity.
And what's the easiest way to kind of get back to that authentic self, whatever the authentic self might be?
There's no easy way or magic pill. If there was, I would write a book tomorrow and sell 1 billion copies.
It's more personal than just like writer's block.
It really is. I mean, again, being unafraid to explore some of these shadow sides, being sober really helps. People that are still caught up in addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol or food or, you name it, it's really hard to get conscious when you're living unconsciously. So, the clients I work with, I do require that they're sober at least 60 to 90 days when we begin our work. If that happens to be one of their issues, having the courage to be conscious and really commit to doing this work and knowing that, there's some dark, uncomfortable stuff that's going to come up. But as a therapist, I'm here to help my clients along the way. It's not all going to be roses, but if you have that courage to go along on that hero's journey, knowing that you're going to hit threshold guardians, knowing that there's going to be challenges, you may even feel like you're going through a death. But if you can just keep going, you're going to hit a rebirth, and you're going to enter this world of metaphorical riches at the end. It's not always money; it's often insight or just the accumulated experience that you've gained. These soul enlarging experiences that you've had will make you a more balanced, more integrated person. It takes a lot of work and commitment.
And that is where I am cutting you off. It's time to go do your work. Hopefully this was already inspiring for you, and if you enjoyed it, you'll definitely enjoy tomorrow's episode. Really enlightening stuff about why creative people turn to drugs or alcohol, and it makes complete sense to me. And Philip also gives you advice on how to open up a dialogue with your creative blocks. Completely effective, really simple, and I tried it after the episode, and it definitely did work for me. Like, instantly. And it was kind of fun. And we also get into the idea of synchronicity, which is actually the reason that we connected in the first place. So, lots of good stuff, but it is all going to be waiting for you tomorrow if you need the push again. So hopefully you were inspired today to get your work done. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe so that you do not miss tomorrow's episode. Head to yourcreativepush.com. You can find it on iTunes, yourcreativepush.com/iTunes, yourcreativepush.com/Stitcher, or just search Your Creative Push in whatever podcast player you happen to listen to this on. But for now, go and get your work done, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great and productive day. Bye.